after all this time, we have to pay the price. You'll be glad to know that I'm in true form. This is third video. That means that we are going to be ratcheting up the complexity just a little bit more. So far, we've seen only single levels of keys, and we've only seen single levels of items in lists. But we are going to see dimensionality in this video. The ability for us to be able to actually put dictionaries inside of dictionaries and make something more complex, something that actually looks a little bit more like a table and more highly organizes our data. And here's our problem formation from the last video. Largely still unchanged in terms of the basket and the shop list. However, if we take a look at that inventory, it's gotten a little more complex. Let's scroll down just a little bit to have a better look. That seltzer, for example, that first key, has actually gained 2 of what I'll call sub-keys. And I might start referring to these as rows or row-like. We see that we actually have what could constitute 3 columns if we start to think about this as a table. We have the name of the item, a quantity, and a price. But let's actually have a look at what that looks like in table form. Here we can think of our more complex dictionary as, like I said, a table or in tabular form. When we're thinking about each of the dimensions of this problem, we could start to think of each of these things as rows and each of the sub-keys as columns. So if you're working with a 2-dimensional dictionary, it might help you to actually draw it out in this structure. Let's compare. And as you can see, there are 2 subkeys that correspond to the 2 other columns here, quantity and price. So our first key is the item name, and the next 2 are their constituent characteristics. And in a grocery store, these are 2 things that might be common. Now looking on down the table, you'll see that there are other entries that I will call rows or row-like that have the same behavior. And have a look at that last entry. So how can I change my program to accommodate this new change? You'll notice when I tried to run my code again, I received an error. Essentially because in the place of an integer that used to be just the inventory count, I now have a dictionary. And I need to be able to handle these new subcolumns in such a way as to get back to those quantities. But lucky for us, we don't have to do a ton of rewriting. We actually only have to add on detail. Now, if you start to think of these square bracket entries next to the variable name in dictionaries as kinds of columns, we can already start to see that we're working on the first column here, the item name. And if we want to augment it, we want to test if the inventory item quantity is greater than 0, all we need to do is add on the quantity key. And that allows us to get into the item, look at its subkeys, get quantity, and compare. I also want to remove 1 from the quantity itself. So I also want to affect it here. I want to edit it. I can target that specific column. Again, looking at these as columns, item name, column, item quantity. And as I said, there's no such thing as a free lunch. I have to pay for the things I take off the shelf. So I'm going to cost plus gets, inventory, item, and instead of quantity, get price. Again, I'm just going down that table 1 more column. Now, of course, the boss is going to not contribute anything toward the cost of what I'm about to get him, but Splendid Sardines being what they are and the boss being who he is, he of course deserves only the best. So let's find out what it's going to cost me if I'm going to go ahead and get him everything that he wants and only a little of what I want. Right? And though I feel like I say this every week, it's still true that even though we've only covered just a little content, what we have covered allows us to represent so many more problems, and coupled with everything you already know, we're going to be able to work with some real data this week. And I look forward to doing that with you in your lab.